Hi, this is Corey Johnston, and today's good lesson is going to be a prequel of a previous lesson. We finished John's 7th chapter, but we left the beginning for last, so we've done everything up until verse 14 in 3 separate lessons. This is going to be the 4th. This is going to be the prequel, yet the capstone of the assignment, and we just really want to trace it back to the 6th chapter. There we read it's the Passover season. In the 7th chapter, it is the Festival of Tents, so that what happens in here is in spring. In the 6th chapter, what happens in the 7th chapter is in autumn, 6 months, and then what happens in the 10th chapter is Hanukkah, so that's winter, and then 11 and 12 are in between. So he has 6 years left to live, and there's also a 6 month blank spot between what happens in the 6th and the 7th, and that it is to those that we must find in the synoptics. A lot of study Bibles have the chronological overlaps of the events as they are ordered in the chronological order they come in certain, there's references, so that resource is useful to get otherwise unobtainable information, because we can only read them one at a time, so we get lost in the maze of the mix because they say slightly different things in slightly different ways and have slightly different orders, but it's all faithful, accurate, and true. And so in this Passover festival, Passover season, what he does is he performs 2 miracles, the first of which takes place in a day. He feeds 5,000 people with these minuscule amount of loaves and breads, and this event is unique to the synoptics. But what is common to the synoptics, they all speak of it in the same way, but Philip is the prominent disciple in John's version, and then he breaks out into a sermon beginning in verse 26 all the way up till 58, and so this sermon, this meaning of the miracle is unique to John, and it's to him we are indebted to for the meaning of the miracle. But in between the first what happens at night, he delivers the sermon the next day. So the 6th chapter is 2 days in the life of the most remarkable man who ever lived, and then there's a 6-year gap of just silence. But at night, what he does is he walks on waters, and this sort of freaks out the disciples, but he assures it is him. And then in the 4th and final section, first off, we did this chapter in 3 sections. We didn't do the walking on water, but we did the meaning of the loaves and whatnot, and also the sermon. We divided that at the 46th and 47th mark, and we covered the remaining material in the final one. But the 60th is truly the 4th section of this book, wherein we read the response to his teachings, and the location is in a synagogue in Capernaum, where he asks, and where this question is asked, and the question which prompts the response was, "Rabbi, when did you come here?" Verse 25. In other words, why might make more sense, but they're saying, when did you come here? He was in the boat overnight, so he had vanished from their town as far as they were concerned, but then he takes it right back to them to give them the meaning of the message, to separate those who are looking for physical nourishment from those who can truly benefit from the spiritual nourishment that he uniquely can provide. And he says, therefore many of his disciples, having heard, said, "This word is a hard saying. Who is able to hear it?" So the message they were responding to, we just have to backtrack a bit. Verse 53, Joshua therefore said to them, "Verily, verily, I say unto you, unless you eat of the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood, you have no life in yourselves." So what he's telling us is we cannot save ourselves. You cannot save yourselves. I cannot save myself. Our situation is so hopeless that only he can save us. We can't do that. So he's telling them that you don't have the ingredients. You don't have what it takes to get through. You need me. So that is naturally hard to bear and offensive. And then verse 56, "He who eats my flesh and drinks my blood stays in me, and I in him. As the living Father sent me, and I live because of the Father. So he who feeds on me shall live because of me." In other words, the life that you will have will not be your own. The walk that you have will not be your own. Everything will belong, when you belong to him, when you accept him by faith and consume him, you have to literally consume him, eat him. That means to have him saturate your soul, whole mind, soul, body, and being so much that it defines who you are and what you determines what you do. That's the ideal, but this is a hard saying for a lot of people. But we, having the offer of life explained and thus offered, who can resist it? But Yahshua, knowing within himself that his disciples were grumbling about this, said to them, "Does this offend you?" So he can anticipate the motives in their minds. He has the transparent insight into the human heart and the mind. So he is an instant mind reader, and but he also the word was spoken, but this is offensive to them because they think it's hard, and Christianity is hard, and it is offensive because it is hard. It is offensive because it is the condemnation of the world. The world's never going to like us, never has, never will. Well, the world is in fact one of our three spiritual enemies. But I think it's increasingly my contention that contemporary Christianity needs to take a more belligerent posture towards sin in society. So we need to get more offensive, in other words, in what's the shackles that's holding us down is this ethos of political correctness, this secular, satanic movement, which is nothing more than an assault on the connection and on the Constitution, and by connection Christianity, this ethos that it is a virtue to not offend people who are so culturally conditioned to be so weak-minded as to seek solace in taking offense. That's what certain kids in college, not much younger than me, are doing. They live to be offended because they look to be offended. They're so morally bankrupt that they draw satisfaction, that they get vicariously angry for when you say things about other people. They just step in and they're looking to be offended. So we don't have to worry about them. They're our enemies, let them keep being lost, but don't bring it into God's house, that which is Satan's. But what if you see the Son of Man going up where he was before? So this is an extraordinary claim. He's anticipating nothing more than his resurrection. He doesn't speak of the cross, at least in the passages we're going to be covering. But, would it make a difference? Would you stop being offended if I told you that I was resurrecting, and through me, the life that I offer by consuming me is unto heaven in the Father, the heavenly throne with the Father? But some of you who do not believe, for Yahshua knew from the beginning who they were who did not believe and who would deliver him up. So he had prophetic and providential premonition of Judas's betrayal. He is not identified by name here, but it once more shows that his mind operates on a clearly, tangibly superior level than anyone else's. From then on, many of his disciples withdrew and were not walking with him anymore. So disciples is plural. This is not the disciples. This is not the 12. The 12 are differentiated in the next mark. So a lot of people draw away. A lot of would-be converts get curious, and then they get disappointed. They're told the cost of discipleship. You have to deny yourself, forsake your self-interest, and just be others-oriented, take up your cross daily, and then follow me. And that offends a lot of people. The other thing that offends a lot of people is that he is the only way to salvation. The world praises diversity above all else, and just this offensive, the narrowness, the sheer restrictedness of the path to salvation. Now, I may be a bit more of a universalist than most Christians. I think that it would be manifestly unjust and therefore inconsistent with the nature of divinity to judge someone who's never heard the gospel. So those who live before and outside of Christianity are without excuse. Most a lot of Americans have heard, and they join the crowd that hasn't heard. It's always going to be that division. And he turns it to an application to the 12th, Simon Peter. Yahshua therefore said to the 12, "Do you also want to go away?" Then Simon Peter answered him, "Master, to whom shall we go? You possess words of everlasting life, and we have believed, and we know that you are the Messiah, the Son of the living Elohim. So Simon Peter is sort of the spokesman of the apostles. He's the most impulsive in outbursts, but he speaks for them, and he's second in station only to the master himself. He is his most entrusted and loyal lieutenant. So he said, there's only you. Where else are we going to go? We know you have the words of life. We want life. We're going to stick with you. We're going to forsake friends and family and everything else and incur the enmity of the world to follow you and get this life that you offer and you speak of. And, they had been faithful throughout. In this confession, the Son of the living Elohim, in the synoptic versions, this confession emerges as a response to a question that he has, who do they say I am? And they, cite the variety of erroneous popular pollings, Elijah, Jeremiah, one of the prophets, and then, but who do you say I am? And Simon Peter once more answers, you are the Messiah, the Son of the living Elohim. So he was aware of his divine human duality. He had an accurate understanding of who he walked with. And we just got to close with the 70th and 71st verse before we get to the lesson itself. Longest preamble ever, but what are you going to do? So Yahshua answered them, have I not chosen you, the 12, and one of you is a devil? He was now speaking of Judah from Iscariot, of Simon, for he was one of the 12, was about to deliver him up. So he's only a year away from death at this point. He's in Jerusalem in the third Passover in his ministry. The first Passover, we can read that in John 2:23. That's when he clears out the temples and, just throws this wrathful retribution of how they're abusing and corrupting his father's home, turning it into a den of merchants. And then the final week, John has more to say about the final day, not so much the final week. The final week of his life is contained in the 12th chapter. The final day is chapters 13 through 19. But he knew that Simon of Iscariot, and he was the son of Simon, and this is distinct from an other Judas, a disciple known by that name who belonged to the 12. John is clear to differentiate that this is not Judas in the 14th chapter when he does reference the other Judas. First verse, 7th chapter, Gospel of John, lesson itself. And after this, Joshua was walking in Galilee, for he did not want to walk in Judah because the Jews were seeking to kill his life. So the locations of Galilee, it should be noted, were to the north of the region that was to the north of Judea, so the former kingdom of Judah. Galilee belonged to the former kingdom of Israel, but by the Roman division, remember, they are no longer a self-autonomous governing monarchical unit. They are controlled and governed by the military might of Rome, which has divided their country into three respective regions. So the Galilee and Samaria constitute what used to be the northern kingdom. Judea is still its own thing, but the Jews there, this is not a broad blanket statement for all Jews everywhere, just the Jews who were in power, the ones he had to worry about. It was enough that they were trying to keep take his life for him to not go there. So he had every reasonable right and reason to not want to walk in Judea, because when there's people murderously motivated against you, you tend to stay away from that thing. Remember, his mind operates at a superior level than anyone in this, and we certainly witness that in the dialogue which transpires between him and his brothers. And the festival of the Jews was near, the festival of tents. So the festival of tents is 6 months after the Passover. To reiterate, this is in the spring of the this is in the autumn of the final year of his life, and but the brothers challenge him to make himself known openly and publicly, and once more he appeals to his providential plan. But the festival of the tents was the time, and it was connected to the Exodus experience. It was the time for their descendants to commemorate their own experience living in tents, even as they become settled and comfortable in civilized society. So his brothers said to him, "Get away from here and go into Judah, so that your disciples also see the works that you are doing." So the brothers is plural. He had more than one. Mary did have sexual relations with her husband Joseph after conceiving Yahshua through the virgin birth. So these are his half brothers, strictly speaking, and two, we read of their names in elsewhere throughout the scripture, but the two most prominent ones from the New Testament standpoints are Jude and James, the authors of books in that document. But they struggle to believe, as we'll eventually come to learn. For no one acts in secret while he himself seeks to be known openly. If you do these, show yourself to the world. So they're challenging him, and why are they doing this? They don't believe him. It's motivated in doubt and lack of belief. So they're challenging. They know, they're almost sending him to his certain death if they really don't believe what they're saying. So that's kind of an odd perspective on that, but it's what came out of here. No one acts in secret while he seeks to be known openly. They are putting words into his own mouth that did not originate from his own mind. He did not seek to be known openly. It was not part of the plan to reveal himself at Passover. A lot of things had to take place before he came to Jerusalem. It wouldn't be until the final Passover, the third year of his ministry, that the full revelation came. For even his brothers did not believe in him. How tragic to grow up in intimate proximity and familial, the same family as the greatest man who, more than a man who walked on earth, and to struggle to believe even in his lifetime. Now what's important here is doubt is not permanent. They became believers after the resurrection, as we all have. So most of Christianity, it's only been a brief time. It all began with a man whose ministries lasted 3 years, and there were people who had to respond to his claims and everything else while he walked in the flesh. But for posterity, it is faith in the resurrection, and that's what ultimately lulled in his brothers into the orbit network. Yahshua therefore said to them, my time has not yet come, but your time is always ready. So he had an awareness of his own time. He spoke of his hour as early as Cana. He was not ready to initiate his public ministry then, but they have an emergency situation where he reveals his miraculous powers, and then it all takes off from there. His time had not come yet. He knew that it was only 6 months away. His time, he's referring to his death, but what he says to them, he says to us, your time is always ready. So we need to be prepared for the second coming. We need to live as if it could happen in our lifetimes, because it's only, I can hear his footsteps coming around the corner, not saying that for exaggeration, not saying that for effect, but, the machinations of one world government, which we don't have time to get in today, are leading towards the one world government superstate, which will be the platform through which the anti-Messiah will rise and rule. So we got to be prepared, we got to be watching, we got to be working, we got to be witnessing, we got to be waiting. These are our 4 preparatory duties. It is impossible for the world to hate you, but it hates me because I bear witness of it, that its works are wicked. So his brothers, he tells them they belong to the world. They're not with him yet. They don't join him until after he certifies his claim that we read earlier. What if I raised up for you and returned from whence I came? Would it make a difference? The implicit connection is tied into something he says in the Upper Room Discourse, the 15th chapter, verses 18 through 19. If we walk in his ways, we will incur the hatred of the world. The world does not like us. We have an alien, opposite, radically at variance with their own outlook on disposition on things in life and spirituality. So they're never going to like us, but that's because we expose the darkness. The darkness lashes out in vicious cycles when its nature is exposed. Satan doesn't like when people talk out against, everything he does. You go up to this festival. I am not yet going up to this festival, for my time has not yet been filled. So he once more is his logical nucleus, is his time. So his time, and we do witness eventually that he did go to the festival. So he did not lie to them. He just didn't go the way they had ordered. They wanted him to go openly. And he said, no, I'm going to come anonymously, but I'm going to take over the temple in a public display of my confession. These men who are trying to kill me will not lay hands with me, and I will emerge. And that's what we eventually read in the subsequent lessons. But in having said this to them, he stayed in Galilee. So Galilee is the center of his ministerial operations. Remember, it's to the north of Samaria, which is to the north of Judea. But when his brothers had gone up to the festival, then he also went up, not openly, but as it were in secret. So they wanted him to go openly. We witnessed this in the next Passover, that he returns to Jerusalem. He comes with and the donkey, and the crowds exclaim, Hosanna, Hosanna, all according to the fulfillment of prophecy of Zechariah. But here he prefers the cloak of anonymity, but he's going to reveal himself and draw everyone in the room to a decision with the teaching that he unleashes after the material we covered today. So this section kind of establishes the context for the really exciting stuff here. There's some interesting things in here, but it gets a lot heavier and thicker as we progress. The Jews therefore were seeking him at the festival and said, where is he? So they wanted to know where he was, because remember, they were intent on killing him. They had heard rumor of this mysterious miracle man from Nazareth who was he was a threat to the status quo and a threat to their authority, because he spoke with his own authority, and he was not lettered, as we read in the 15th verse. And they wanted to know how he spoke so powerfully or eloquently. Clearly a supernatural power was he. And they try and kill him eventually. The temple guards the high priest and the Pharisees send the temple guards to seize him, but the temple guards are converted whilst en route to seizing him. Never had they heard a man spoke like that. Like, it's a little far ahead of ourselves. And there was much grumbling about him among the crowd. Some were saying he is good, but others were saying no, but he is leading the crowd astray. So there's always this dichotomy and division of perception. There's people who accept him and there's people who reject him. And rejection is part of the Christian life. You have to be willing to be rejected and make yourself known. Not everyone's going to want to hear it, but it's eventually something you should work on. I'm not saying don't go out and make public professions if you don't have the knowledge or you don't have the equipment. That's what I'm here for. Whatever state of spiritual maturity you're at, I'm here for you. We want to come to the correct decision. He was good, and he does not lead astray. The resurrection is real. It is not a fantasy. It is not a fairy tale. It is not a fabrication. We have the chance of being resurrected by grace through faith, but not just faith in anything. Faith as a source is morally neutral. Its moral worth or lack thereof is solely determined in the object in which it rests. So if we have faith in his finished work on the cross, then we can access the portal of divine grace unto salvation. However, no one spoke openly of him for fear of the Jews. So they had reason and right to fear the Jews. No one wants to publicly, then as now, publicly professing him comes with consequences and social stigmas. And it's a moment of decision, and in our decision, and it ultimately boils down to, in the final analysis, is whose esteem do we covet? Do we covet the world's, or do we want and desire Yahweh's esteem? And he will esteem us and honor us if we incur the wrath of the world. And that's the ultimately superior alternative to bearing his wrath, is to, we only got a little time on this earth. Why not, get a few people offended while we're here, Once more, offense is not the virtue that the perverts of political correctness exalt it to be in their own perverted imaginations. Verse 14, final one of the lesson itself. Oh, that's actually all the time. That's the lesson itself. We've done this earlier. This is the event, and we get so it's the middle of the festival, which transpires after it, and we broke down the teaching that he expounds on. So he does not come in open. He does not make himself known until the middle. So he comes in secret, comes as a pilgrim, but then he does eventually accommodate his brother's request, which remember was rooted in doubt. So we don't want to make the same mistake as some of these people. It's never too late. The brothers struggled to believe, and they, in fact, but doubt was not permanent in their situation. And to doubt is not sinful. It's not sinful to question everything you've ever been taught and challenge every assumption. But unbelief is sinful, and the difference is that a doubting mind struggles to believe, but an unbelieving mind refuses to believe. We don't want to be that hard-hearted because, as the word says, and I'll close with this, Proverbs 29:1, he who being reproved often and hardeneth his neck shall be cut off soon, and that without remedy. They will not have access to the living water and the bread of life, as he proclaims himself in the earlier sermon. That's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much. I'll see you soon. Take care until then. Bye-bye.